Hi, everybody. I am Aaron of SIG Beard, and you are at the Kubernetes SIG Testing weekly meeting for Tuesday, June 25th. We will all be adhering to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct by basically not being jerks. On today's agenda, we're going to have Steve walk us through the new monitoring stack that's been put together for Prow. And then we have some discussion about sort of configuration-related things that we're interested in for Prow. So I will hand off to Steve to show us monitoring.prow.k8s.io.
Cool, thank you. So today, it's very important that you prefix this with an HTTPS, but that won't be necessary soon. Oh God. Not sure if you guys can still hear me. I pressed the share screen button. It seems to have frozen my laptop.
I can still hear and see you. I don't see a shared screen or anything.
Oh, okay, cool. Here. Hopefully this is coming through.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, awesome. So this is monitoring.prow.k8s.io. And so we have added a number of dashboards that we found useful and interesting. So some of these already existed in Velodrome and are currently just being calculated using the, taking one step back. So the architecture of this monitoring stack is a Prometheus instance, a Grafana instance, and an Alert Manager instance that are standalone. All of the manifests to deploy those are in the repo, and they don't require like any other external services other than a PV if you want your data to stick around for a long time. Whereas the Velodrome instance requires some other databases, and it's complicated and much harder to set up. So this data here is from the Tide dashboard. It's pretty much the same thing that is exposed by Velodrome. It's just being exposed from Prometheus itself and not using the push gateway. So these are some of the pre-existing dashboards, and they're still here. And then there's been a couple of new dashboards added, like the actions of Syncer. And you can look at, interesting hysteresis over a week. These are also, so the metrics underneath this sort of thing can also be used, for instance, to calculate HTTP like request and response latency for DAC, and there's an AppDex score here. The metrics underneath all of these plots are also hopefully going to be used to create alerts. So for instance, one of the alerts that is set up but is a little bit finicky is if Hook hasn't ingested a webhook from GitHub for 5 minutes during what we've arbitrarily called business working hours, an alert fires. And some other alerts that might be interesting could be if the ratio of 500s or 400s here from DEC is larger than expected or something like that. So this is sort of the bare bones framework necessary, and we're hoping to add more metrics as we see them. There's an issue open right now for remaining tokens for GitHub alongside like what exactly are the calls we're making, stuff like that. And also we're hoping to add more dashboards as we realize like which parts of the system are useful to monitor. So if you're looking to get involved with this, all of the manifests for this can be found in test infra. They are under the Prow monitoring directory, and currently everything is a flat file just being deployed by Basil. So it's up, it's working, and hopefully we'll be able to make it better as we move forward.
One question regarding the working hours.
Yep.
How do you define working hours?
Yeah, so we actually
is that US working hours? Because
right. So
I know
we haven't turned that one on for that's like the version of that that's running on the Prow cluster. I personally administer has working hours defined as any working hour where we have somebody who can be on call. Obviously suboptimal, but it's at least better. We had a fire on one of the US holidays because nobody was working, but you know, like, it's going to be a fragile alert, but it should have few false positives. Admittedly fragile.
One other thing for alerting, what are you planning to use there? I saw that you have something called Alert Manager. Is that the tool that you're going to use for this, or?
Yeah, so that's like usually the most common thing that's paired with Prometheus, and having it fire off a Slack notification is pretty simple.
All right.
I'm just hugely excited by this. I haven't really been paying too much attention because I didn't want to watch a pot boil. But just at a quick glance, it looks like you have all of the Grafana dashboards stored inside of config maps, and so we can use the same GitOps-driven model that we use to update jobs and stuff to update Grafana dashboards.
Yep, this is
right. So if I wanted to noodle around and make my own Grafana dashboard, would I need to stand up my own instance and then download the JSON and shove it into a config map or something?
So this is currently kind of an open question. The approach that OpenShift has been using is we have a staging namespace with all of this stuff deployed, and the Grafana instance in there is just using the production data as a back. So you can log into the staging Grafana, noodle around manually, and then create something that you like, see what it will actually look like with production data. Cole wasn't super interested in having to deploy twice as many things. So right now, the Kubernetes Grafana has an admin login that you can use. And the thought was you would create the dashboards there and then delete them and then check in the JSON afterwards. But I think that's still kind of up in the air because Catherine was talking about maybe having the staging anyway. So
yeah, I mean, I personally am interested in it from the perspective of I've had a number of people on the release team or just community members in general who are interested in making dashboards to show things, since we talk about test health and flakiness and stuff like that. And yeah. I'd love to give them a canonical place to do that.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is a question of are there potentially security problems with that? I don't know if there are. I just want to pull up super quickly one of the dashboards that we've got that I think we haven't migrated yet because it's just specific to what we're doing, but would be useful. I believe if we have a staging instance of Grafana with a login that lets you noodle around in there, I don't think that would let you do anything malicious with the data. I'm not certain though.
Yes, build cop dashboard. I want to see what that is.
Yeah, so this is basically just filtering by org, repo, and branch across what time period, look at the success rate and failure rate of jobs matching some esoteric thing. And so this is then also used to drive our target success rate for release jobs is however many %. And then when that drops, an alert is fired. And I think this would be generally applicable, at least the approach to Kubernetes as well.
Okay, this looks really cool. My other question would be so does this mean we can kill Velodrome? What else has to happen for us to use this fully instead of Velodrome?
So the last piece Velodrome is a large concept. I don't think will be dead, because if you want to have all of the GitHub contribution metrics, all of the
I don't know that we use those, is my point. The one thing that I don't see in this dashboard that I know we use Velodrome for, but I think we just use it as an influx database sync, is the jobs that run queries against BigQuery and then transform the results using JQ into things that can be dumped into influx so that we can get statistics about, the BigQuery metrics dashboard. that shows sort of like everything that's going on.
Yeah, so the part of Velodrome that wouldn't die would be the database that's backing this.
Okay, but so you're saying the monitoring is using a different influx instance at the moment.
It's not using any influx at all, and that's where it's like significantly less complicated. It's just literally using a backing store for Prometheus. Like,
oh, it's just using Prometheus entirely.
yes.
Gotcha. What's the retention like on that?
It just depends on how large you make the PB.
Okay.
I think that I don't know off the top of my head what it's configured for OpenShift. I think we have 100 gigabytes, and we have it set to 2 months, I believe.
Okay. But so it's still probably possible to hook this up to other data sources, including the Prometheus data source.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like when you're creating Grafana dashboards, like configuring which data source they draw from is extremely simple. Like you can add as many as you like. So of Velodrome, if we continue to have the pieces that ingest GitHub data and digest that into the dashboard or into the influx, as well as having the BigQuery stuff also, publishing to that database, as long as that database sticks around, all of that can just be transposed into.
That looks super awesome. Thank you for demoing that, Steve. Before we move on to other discussion type stuff, while we're talking about showing stuff, I just wanted to give a quick mention of the most exciting thing, which would be documentation. So today, if I go to the test info repo, I landed a PR yesterday that tries to do a better job of explaining a lot more of what is in test infra and tries to sort of surface a number of the dashboards and tools that we have, and then tries to better explain some, but not all, of the directories that are in here. I am very open to feedback from people, especially in the form of PRs, if they think this should be different or if there should be more stuff here. Like I try to make sure that what is here is stuff that I personally kind of encounter on a day-to-day basis. That may be different than what you encounter on a day-to-day basis. This is partially inspired by the awesome docs that Daniel showed us from the Kima project, though I still haven't I haven't even begun to plumb the depths of what we could use from that. The other thing is all this stuff around job management. If I click on this, it will take me to a README inside of the config jobs directory, which tries to spell things out, hopefully a little bit more. I still don't think it is quite as ideally step-by-step as what I have seen from the Kima project and other people, but we try to talk a little bit more now about like, hey, what even are pre-submits and post-submits when we use this language? What are sort of our best practices for the images you're supposed to use for jobs? What even are these preset things that you see everywhere? What are some good examples that you can copy paste from? Like what are some known good job configs and just sort of the steps that you have to follow? So just again, if you try following these and you find things don't work as documented, I would really appreciate feedback, especially in the form of pull requests to make this a little bit better. So hopefully that helps. Okay, so next, Steve, you had an item here about sort of how we want to handle configuration on a per namespace basis. Can you help give us a little bit more context for what we're talking about here? Or do we want to skip this?
Eric's not on the call.
No, he is not.
Yes, just for everyone else that might be interested, definitely jump into the thread here, and hopefully you're not hearing the whining. Jump into the thread and put your thoughts in there. The basic thing is, I think you can, so right now we're kind of in like a weird halfway state in Prow where you can either configure you can configure Prow to operate inside of a namespace by changing the config.yaml. You can do it by changing the credentials that are given. You can do it by actually setting it at a per job level. And so there's just a lot of 17 different ways to skin that cat. And I'm sure that if you choose to skin it Oh God.
There's the squeaky toy. I knew if I asked for it, I would get it.
Yeah, so there's probably just many different ways to skin that cat, and they're mutually exclusive and probably don't work well together. So if you'd like to be involved in choosing how we expose that in the future, go ahead and drop into that thread.
So is this about the Proud components themselves, or is this about the
Derivative resources created to like execute a job. Give me one second.
Okay, right. So this is how, for example, today I think there's a hard-coded field in config YAML I think we use to say all of the pods that are created as a result of Proud jobs live in the test pods namespace. And then I think we further use the cluster field on our Proud job configs to say schedule these jobs over in this other cluster in the test pods namespace in that cluster.
But then on top of that, you're also able to like I think the build controller and the pipeline controller currently also honor a specific field on each job that tells them which namespace to put things in, where things are not necessarily pods. And then on top of that, I believe with those two controllers as well, you're able to change how that works by giving cluster credentials with a default namespace or something else. So,
but personally, like I think I can understand the idea that we want to like have sort of same prescriptive defaults, but we also want to allow enough flexibility for people to sort of meet their use cases. So I'm wondering if this is a case of like, if there are too many options and they conflict with each other too much, or if we just haven't like documented sort of the hierarchy of like which options should override which, so that we can sort of.
It's partially that, and I think it's also partially a question of like what do we expect administrators to be doing and what do we expect users to be doing. Like I think if we give like a blanket, schedule, like as an attack vector, as a user, I could schedule my test pod in the kube system namespace and then do a lot of interesting things in there. And so to some extent, the argument might be that choosing which namespace things run in is like an administrator level configuration and shouldn't be exposed to users on the job level. So I think that there's a lot of angles at which this could be looked at.
Yeah, that's fair. I have noticed a trend a lot where we're not really sure what a best practice is. So we sort of, our tools have like really sharp edges that can allow you to cut yourself, but then we try to sort of figure out what same practices are and then lint or test those away via pre-submits. So like sort of enforcing that like all jobs do things in the same way. So like I think trusted jobs, right? Trusted jobs are really just like a test that ensures that jobs that can be scheduled to this cluster can only live in this directory that has a very specific set of owners. We don't really have a ton of defense in depth there.
Which you could probably get by providing templates and restricting new jobs to these templates, right?
That's very possible. Is that something that you have used over in the Kima project?
We haven't enforced it, but we have a lot of templates in our stuff, and we're using them basically for everything.
Yeah, I feel like I saw some pretty good copy-paste examples from templates in some of your docs, and what I had been trying to do was look for like sane, safe defaults in our stuff, and it's been difficult for me to find sort of clean, consistent job configs that haven't organically evolved over like years and years. So I think
enforcing that, I think, especially with the migration to pod utils, was something that was like on the agenda for product.kits.io configs. Because I know that for us too, they're not templates per se, but we expose like the 6 things we expect the user to change, and then we generate the rest of the config for them. So I think having, at least a couple of years ago when we last talked about this, having like a low-level configuration language and then letting people, come to that with their own higher-level DSL made a lot of sense. That might not make sense today, but
I I still like that as a model. I just don't think anybody's come through with the DSL. And instead, we just have like a bunch of scripts that sort of munge the raw configs that humans will often copy paste around without realizing what they're copy pasting and why. And so not
I think
very intentional.
as part of the migration to pod utils, like coming to something sensible, like especially for like every single job that's running kube test or whatever, like those things can all look the same. So yeah, making that would be super useful.
Yeah, this is just kind of like off the agenda, but like I tried moving a job over to pod utils as part of that docs thing, and I find that there's still a little bit of weird, unexpected behavior there that is difficult to test locally. Like, I would prefer to live in a world where we can encourage other people to migrate their jobs over, and the best way to empower them to do that is to give them like a develop and test cycle before they open up PR. And like right now, we don't really have a great workflow or place for people to try out jobs and understand what pod utils does differently than just running a straight container, which was surprising, for example, to learn that like I guess part of the decoration stuff smashes the go path environment variable for reasons, but doesn't like smash it fully in a way that makes sense to people who have no idea that's going on in the background.
Yeah, and like capturing the poor UX of interaction with the low-level config, capturing the poor UX of getting feedback for changed config. I think all of these things are actually in the epic stack as items.
Yeah.
Like one of the larger epics with these like sub items in it was just like the self-service management story for proud jobs is like pretty poor, without layering on extra tools, which I think Kima and Richard have seen. But I think, as I mentioned to you on Slack, like part of that has always been like I think there's a higher level of trust in other deployments of Prow, and so then, running job changes as a pre-submit for PRs that are changing config makes sense. But yeah, there's definitely a middle ground that can be found without getting into the weeds there.
So I kind of feel like I don't really have the right people here or enough time to talk about the last thing I had on the agenda, which was breaking Prow out into its own sub-project and understanding the mechanics of moving Prow to sort of the code lives over here and the configuration lives over here. That's like what I want to get to, and I want to understand what technical or social limitations we have in between here and there. I'm also aware that the meeting next week would be July 2nd. I am planning on being around for that, but it is adjacent to a holiday in the US, which may mean some people are not available. So I will be sending out a notice to the mailing list asking if we want to hold it. But I think it would be a great idea to sort of walk through the Prow Epic stock next week and really kind of hash some of these things out. I also am aware that we have sort of a GMT-friendly or European-friendly meeting happening on Friday. Steve, do you want to speak to that real quick?
Yeah, there's a meeting happening on Friday, 2:30 p.m. GMT. If you'd like to have anything for that agenda, I'm going to link the doc in the chat. Currently, there is nothing there, so the meeting won't happen.
I'll send some of my European colleagues over.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.
But yeah, so hopefully that will be, I think right now we're thinking monthly, just ad hoc as we need it when stuff comes up, and we just want to make sure that everyone's got a chance to collaborate.
Cool. It gives us a minute left. Anybody have anything before I get kicked out of my room?
Can you link the Epics document? I don't know if I have the link to that you were talking about just now.
Sure, and I'll make sure I put it in the upcoming meeting notes as well. Okay. Yep,
Thank you.
yep. And there's my room. Sorry, I have to leave now. This is how I ensure our meetings end on time. I will see you all, maybe some of you on Friday, and I will see the rest of you maybe next week. We shall find out. Have a happy Tuesday.
You too.